And now I'm excited to introduce our incredible panel of passionate women. First is Melissa Wells. She's Special Assistant to the President at North America's Building Trades Unions, and she will cover recent assessment of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the construction trades. But because Melissa is also a state legislator, she may have to jump off the webinar early because she's in session. So any questions directed at Melissa, if she has to disappear, we will save and try to get answered. Second is Amber Trueblood, CPWR's Data Center Director, and she'll help us understand some information about employment trends in construction for women. Kathy Dobson will go next. Kathy is the Safety Director of Alberici Constructors and will provide an overview of how owners and contractors can benefit from hiring women. And the last heavy hitter is Vicki O'Leary. She's the Director of Diversity and General Organizer at the International Association of Bridge Structural, Ornamental, and Reinforcing Iron Workers and the chair of NAB2's Tradeswomen's Committee. She'll wrap things up by discussing how labor and the industry as a whole can benefit. And thank you all for joining us today. And so first, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa. Go ahead, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And it's a pleasure to be here today with this panel and with so many of you that are attending and watching. I am so pleased to present the first ever report that a diversity research report that's ever been done on the both non-union and union sectors, so the entire construction industry. And NAB2 has really been committed to improving diversity. And one of the best ways we can identify where we are is to take stock. And oftentimes when you take stock, you see some good things, and then you see the areas where we have to continue to improve. And so we're really happy about the survey results, and also I think the accomplishments that we've been able to achieve in terms of increasing diversity pathways for workers of color as well as women in construction. But we know that there's still room for growth. So I think one of the biggest things that we took away from it's the I-Series data set is that we know that unionized pathway programs, they're really showing a lot of success. We know that in the unionized sector of construction, that there are programs, not just a commitment to improving programming and improving representation of women and workers of color, but that we are actually putting money and investment behind programmatic efforts. And so those programmatic efforts that we've been successful in doing really stem around apprenticeship readiness programs utilizing the multi-craft core curriculum. And that curriculum was a curriculum that all the national training directors came together almost around 15 years ago, maybe a little more than that, but came together and said, here are some key factors that we know across whichever craft, whether you're an electrician, whether you are plumber or pipe fitter or iron worker, it ran the gamut. Regardless of what craft you go in, these are some of the basic tenets of experience, of knowledge, of information that would be very useful for someone who maybe does not have much exposure to construction. Folks that maybe didn't grow up seeing a parent or a neighbor or a sibling in the industry. And so those programs, we now have apprenticeship readiness programs. They're teetering and floating around almost 200 programs across the country. And those programs, their focus is specifically on helping provide not only a workforce development pipeline, but also helping to provide more information so that individuals going into the industry can make an informed decision about it. We know that when individuals, this is, I think, a common practice across sectors, but when we expose our young people, when we expose workers to an industry and give them early exposure, give them the ability to understand all the different pathways in that industry, we know that it also can help with retention. And that's something that's really important when we think about growing diversity. It's not just about the on-ramp into the industry, it's also about how do we continue to keep people in the industry. And so we talk about women especially, we know that we don't just want to see them coming in, we want to see them staying in the industry. And we continue to do work with a lot of partners like CWPR. We have a women's committee. You'll hear from Vicki O'Leary, who chairs that committee, about some of the work that they've been doing at the Ironworkers. But we know that we have to continue to support women, especially women workers of color in the space. And so we're very excited about that. So I think the next thing I want to just talk a little bit more when we think about at least the data for the diversity study, but I think it's helpful to kind of provide some overview of how successful the apprenticeship readiness programs, how they've been. So a large part of our ability to show that our programs are working is the fact that we are able to get more workers of color and more women into the industry. And we really lift up the apprenticeship readiness model because it genuinely is an on-ramp for first-generation construction workers and for individuals that maybe didn't have exposure, perhaps whether it's through a high school CTE program or didn't really grow up around people in the industry. And so if you look at the chart, I don't know, hopefully you can see it. I try to make it visible, but also I wanted to make sure I could put some content on there. But if you see roughly 75 to 80% of our apprenticeship readiness participants, they identify as people of color, and between 19 and 25% identify as women. And so this is really important because the more we understand that the apprenticeship readiness program is a way to be able to better target and provide not provide assistance, but better target and to be able to provide a pathway for individuals that want to explore. I came out of the Baltimore DC Building Trade Union, so and I was with them for 7 years. During that time, I was responsible for helping establish many programs and also helping run apprenticeship readiness programs in the region. And one of the things that I would hear from high school teachers, from counselors, and also from our workforce partners is that a lot of the individuals that would go through the program, they liked that it was a way for them to kind of have an insulated experience, a introduction, and the ability for them to explore the pathways without feeling shame or without feeling like, oh, I should know more. They felt comfortable kind of coming into the program and being able to say, I want to go into construction, but I would like to learn a little bit more. And just, I think they felt more support in that pathway. And so that type of support that a lot of the programs are providing in a partnership with our community partners, I think is what is able to not only help us see right here that we're able to get more individuals that haven't historically gone into the trades, but it's also able to show that they're getting into the apprenticeship readiness program and that they're completing the program. So we can't talk about, the success of that. We can't just stop there is what I'm really trying to say. We have to look at those that are getting into the apprenticeship readiness program and then their placement into registered apprenticeship, because our ultimate goal is for more women, for more workers of color to get into the registered apprenticeship pathway, because that is really the speedway, so to speak, if I can use that analogy. That is the highway that we want to see them move down and progress over their career once they journey out and then they continue down the career. So if you look at this table here, these are from our 10 I would say probably our 10 largest programs that we were able to collect data on, and you see that we have a 67.8% retention rate. So those are the number of placements, and then those are the folks that are getting into the apprenticeship readiness program, and then that were in those programs that actually got into the registered apprenticeship program. So I want to just uplift that we know that programs like the Multi-Craft Core Curriculum Apprenticeship Readiness Program is so key to our ability to not only increase diversity, but to understand what type of programs are successful for us to be able to show and begin to continue to make progress in terms of seeing more women and workers of color in the industry. And then I wanted to end just, overall, I think that in terms of what we know from the study and what we know from the work that we've been doing for the past 14 plus years, is that we really have to grow our pipeline for recruitment. We had to change the way that we do recruitment. I would talk to apprenticeship directors when I was with my council, and it was always, oh, we've been going to this same high school, and it's great that you have your tried and true partnerships, but the goal is to always be growing our partnerships, because the more partners that we have who are able to work with, who understand, how we can work collaboratively, the more people that we can reach. And so I just wanted to lift up a few other areas that I know we don't have all the time to go into detail, but I definitely want to shout out Trades Futures, which is a new 501c3 program that NABTU, as well as industry partners, contractors, and HBCUs are working on together. Our executive director of that program is Nicole Schwartz, who is no stranger to this space at all. And one of the things that amongst all the various workforce development goals and priorities of Trades Futures, but a key one is they are currently doing 2 childcare pilots right now. We know that a lot of young workers, women included, but we know that the responsibility of childcare falls on parents, right? So be they women or men, or however they may identify. But so we're doing 2 pilots right now, one in Milwaukee and one in New York City. And so we're really excited about that. This is not the first time that trades have done childcare pilots, but this is the first one that's being done under Trades Futures. I want to lift up Trades Women Build Nations, because it is the largest convening of women in construction, I believe, in the world. And that's exciting. This last year we had, in 2022 was held in Las Vegas. I believe around 3,800 women attended. And anyone who's ever attended a Trades Women Build Nations conference, it's great. You have so many rank and file women. It's a lot of high energy, but a lot of really, really valuable content in terms of leadership, in terms of identifying ways that we continue to change our workplace culture, job site culture, and also continue to talk about ways for women in the trades to continue to step into leadership and empower them to step into leadership. And we have our women's committee, which I alluded to, which is another way that we are continuing to identify different challenges that might be facing women in construction, and how the NABTU and our 14 affiliates, how we can continue to identify ways that we can improve our policies and our culture as well. And then lastly, wanted to lift up our federal partners that we have, especially federal, state, and local, and knowing that there is a huge push right now under this administration, the Biden administration, with the $4 trillion of investment for bipartisan infrastructure, or IIJA, CHIPS and science, as well as the Inflation Reduction. There is a huge focus on ensuring that those trillions of dollars, that they make our workforce, make it more diverse, and that it provides opportunity for more women to enter into the trades and to stay in the trades. And so we're really excited to continue to work with not only the federal government, but our state and local partners, mayors, county executives, and even governors, making sure that they are also committed to this diversity and inclusion expansion on any of their publicly funded job sites, and also on how they can continue to make workplaces for women, especially women, more accommodating and safer, and also for workers of color. And so with that, that concludes my presentation. I believe I am passing the baton over to Amber Trueblood.
Thank you, Melissa. Great presentation, and glad we could keep you on before you run off. So I'm happy to be here today. I'm the CPWR Data Center Director. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Amber Trueblood. Today I'm going to be presenting employment trends for women in construction. I do want to start with a note that I could take the entire time slot just talking data with you about women in construction. Most everyone would not like that, except for our data lovers. So if you are one of those data lovers, or you want more information, we have several published products online. The biggest is our Women in Construction Data Dashboard, and then most of our other data dashboards also include demographics. And then as a highlight, our May products are going to be an update to the current dashboard, as well as a data bulletin doing a deep dive looking at employment and business owner trends of women in construction. I do also want to note the statistics presented today are 2022, which are not currently published. You guys get the very first hot off the press numbers. So I'm very excited to show you some of those trends. So when we look at women as a percent of workers by industry, so all employment in 2022 for selected industries, construction comes in at the lowest at 10.9% for all employment. This is not specific to trades, but all workers in construction. One of the highest is our services at almost 60%. So again, all workers accounted for almost, females account for almost half all workers in the United States at 46.8%. That keeps going up and down. We go almost over to 51% and then back down to about 46% for the past several years. Construction workers accounted again for 10.9%, as I just said previously, so we won't harp on that. Now, historical trends. Are we growing? Are we increasing? So from 2010 to 2022, the percent of all workers that were women decreased slightly by about 1.5%. A percentage change there. Very small. And as I mentioned, if you look at the all workers, it goes up and down close to 50 and then back down to around 46%. Whereas the percent of construction workers that were women was 8.9% in 2010, and we do see a continual growth. That's the positive of continual increase. And in 2022, it hit that 10.9%. So we sort of peaked out. And as you see, that actually hit right around 2019, 2020, where we've hit right around 11%. Now, what about occupations? So looking at the top occupations, so these are the occupations with the most workers in construction. This excludes our other categories. And then some occupations, actually, our data did not have a large enough sample size for women in construction, so they've been excluded. And so in the top occupations that had enough data, just to show, we have very diverse percentages of women in these occupations. So electricians, 1.8% were women workers. Laborers, 5%. Our managers come in at higher percentages. So manager occupation, 18%. Construction manager, 8%. So we do see significant differences when we start looking at occupations. I wish we had better data so I didn't have to exclude, but I will show you what we do have. So any specific occupations, feel free to reach out and I'll let you know if the data is reliable, because I know you guys have a lot of interest. The other interest specifically are the trades, are blue collar workers. And so if we want to go ahead and take a look at that. So all workers, all blue collar workers, all industries, 17% were female. When we look at blue collar workers in construction, that goes down to 4%. So we do see significant reduction in the percent of female workers once we get into our trades. And so we jump again from that 11% to 4% once we reduce, look specifically at blue collar workers. And then looking at some of our historical trends. So we do see an increase overall for all industries that for blue collar workers increasing from about 14% in 2010 to 17% with a very clear increase over time. And then when we look at blue collar construction workers, the percent that are women, we actually see varying patterns. It goes up and down. However, for the most part, we see an increasing trend line. And so from 2010, we've gone up about 2%. It's a small percentage, but it is an increase. We increased from 2.2% to 4.1% from 2010 to 2022. So those are our baseline statistics. And as I mentioned, I have a lot of statistics that are specific. We have a lot of different stats by sex that I can show you if you have very specific questions. Feel free to reach out to me directly at atrueblood@cpwr.com or reach out to our data center, and anyone on my team would be more than happy to respond and get you the information necessary. So I am going to now pass the mic over to Kathy. Hopefully no tech issues doing that.
Thank you very much, Amber. I really appreciate it. We're going to talk a little bit about owners and contractors and how they can benefit from encouraging women to join the industry. I represent a large general contractor, and I'm one of their safety directors. There was a tremendous growth in employment in skilled trade workers from 2011 to 2019, almost over 25% in the construction industry. Pandemic then hit, those numbers then dropped a little bit, but our industry was much less impacted than other industries. We expect the construction industry to increase by another almost 4.5% by 2030. And this chart on the right is pulled from CPWR's 2022 report, and it shows that the highest demand for workers is expected among construction laborers, with about 1.4 million openings. And that's due largely to separations in the industry or workers permanently leaving the industry. Following laborers are carpenters and electricians, and then you see the other trends within other key trades in construction. These numbers, though, did not take into account the potential impact of the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And that act is expected to increase construction spending and create another 1.5 million jobs across all industries in the next decade. And it's likely to make the shortage in construction even greater. Another factor contributing to worker shortage is an aging workforce. We've seen the percentage under the age of workers under the age of 55 decrease by about 5% in the last 10 years or so, while the percentage of workers over 55 increased more than 20%, 21.9% in the workforce as of 2021. Now, if we look at just women, the percentage of women construction workers age 55 and older has increased from just over 22%, 22.8% to 25.3%. So 25.3% of all women construction workers are age 55 and over. And we've seen an even larger increase in the blue collar workers, where they've increased from 15.3% to 19.8%. This is a real concern. And so one obvious way to get more young skilled workers into the workforce is to recruit young women. And as Amber discussed, there was less than a 2% increase in all female construction workers from 2011 to 2021. And right now, we're still missing out on a huge piece of the population. Obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit about safety. And so another benefit to hiring more women is having an improved safety culture and safety climate. A positive safety climate is key in reducing injuries for all workers. Having a diverse workforce is shown to improve worker engagement, and it allows for more diverse thought processes, which can ultimately lead to advancements in work practices and procedures. And on a more practical side for contractors and owners, hiring women allows business owners to meet EEO and affirmative action regulations, and there's also benefits to the community. So, for example, providing more jobs for women can help the local economy. You know, I talked to my boss and I talked to some other contractors, and the message that I got was that they want to have an organization that looks like the communities in which we work. And as they look at the bigger picture, they are starting to get away from organizations and projects that look like a lot of white men. And they're evaluating leadership positions for women. I'm seeing it not only within my own company, but within other organizations across the construction industry. People are being evaluated on their own merit and not just who they know. So it's breaking away from that nepotism that we saw when I first came into the industry almost 25 years ago, and it's bringing on board more women and more persons of color. And you know, we know that when companies put a variety of individuals in the same room, they get different perspectives and opinions that can benefit our businesses, and that helps companies to grow. So, you know, when we talk about improving return on investment, one thing that we need to look at is diversity as a strategy overall, looking at addressing structural changes within our companies, to recognize and underscore the amount of invisible labor that's done by persons of color, and to enlighten our mentoring components. So I've got just a few things that I want to just touch on a little bit. One thing that we know when we bring a diverse group of people into our organizations, it creates creativity and innovation. When a group of like-minded individuals are put together, they'll generate like-minded or similar ideas. Their thinking patterns are very much alike. They have the same experiences, and so they don't often generate a lot of really new, fresh ideas. We're starting to recognize that in the construction industry, and a lot of those companies are being left behind. If you exchange things up by mixing up the workforce, you have a workforce that's more prone to creativity and innovation. So those are really important for success in the industry. I also think that bringing in more women and more persons of color is going to increase our productivity. They go hand in hand. There's been some research that has been shown that says if you diversify your team, it can increase productivity by up to 35%. That's pretty significant, especially when we are considering safe work and productivity, that they don't always go hand in hand. But if you can broadly understand needs, come up with ideas to fulfill them, you'll often come up with ways to make things safer as well. It also, I think, helps to improve employee morale and instill a desire for people to be more effective and work more efficiently. And then I also think that we're going to reduce worker turnover if we bring more women into the industry. A workplace that encourages diversity and inclusion is going to make your employees feel valued and accepted. And I think that that's really important. You know, there's a number of ways that we can recruit diverse candidates and women in our industry. But when companies look at their overall image, I think that it's essential that we understand how we address these issues is going to affect our public image, our community efforts, and also it brings on board social justice. With that, I am going to mute my mic, but I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Vicki O'Leary for the last section here.
Everybody, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, can I have the next slide, please? When you have more women on a job, you actually do gain market share, like Kathy said, and it's so important. I want to bring attention to Sarah Gwen May, who was on the State of the Union address Tuesday night, who was an iron worker out of Ohio, and having a woman, a person of color, being at the State of the Union address, and then being on the Lawrence O'Donnell show the next day on MSNBC is showing women and young girls across the United States that this is serious and we can do this. So I think that's super important. And I also want to just draw your attention to this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures ever taken of ironworkers. And this shows that men and women can work together and have a good time and still get the work done in a harmonious way. And these are a couple of folks from our local in 433 in Los Angeles. She's an iron worker. she's an iron worker, and not a woman iron worker. She is an iron worker. And I think that's really important. Next slide, please. So what about rising tides lifts all boats? We've heard this saying for years, but when we have women on the job, Kathy just said that we improve working conditions for everybody. So think about when they have to bring another porta-john on the job site. And now you've got the women using one and men using the other. To elevate the women by having their own job porta-john elevates everybody on that job site. Better sanitation for sure. But we also, Melissa had talked earlier about childcare, and we know that this is not just a women problem, although women do take care of their children historically more than men have, but this is a family problem. And I'm so thrilled that NAB2 has started Trades Futures, and this is something that they're doing a childcare pilot on. And family leave, which is something construction workers don't have. So important because things happen to our families just like they do in the general public. And when we have better fitting PPE, let's talk about that for a moment. Better fitting PPE. If I'm on a job and their vests are too big for me, chances are they're going to be too big for some of the men on the job as well. Not everyone is a universal size harness. So when we get PPE that fits not only us, there's going to be some men that are actually going to benefit from that as well. So that's really important to start talking about the PPE and start thinking about not only the size of the people that are coming on the job site, but also getting the sizes of PPE that are going to fit them. And we also know that the more women you have on the job, or the more people of color that you have on the job, the less violence there will be on a job. Because when there's more of, there's less harassment and less violence. So until we see women encompassing more than 4% on a job, let's say 20%, really they're not going to be messed with as much because there's more of them. So that's something to keep in mind as we're going through this. The bullying and harassment and intimidation that happen on job sites are not just geared towards women. They're geared towards whoever they consider is the weakest link on that job. So let's stop having the onlys and start having more of what we're looking to have. We know that there's not enough men, not enough white men to handle all the work that's coming down the pipe. So we're going to have to do something. And why not look at the other 51% of the population, women? When we did studies within the ironworkers, we found that women didn't leave the industry because work was too hard or too grueling. They left because of the bullying and harassment and intimidation that they received on the job. Next slide, please. So in order to stop that, we just need more. We would get more union siblings, right? We know that women are rules players. We know that women take their oath with their unions very seriously. They're very good union members. Women contribute to a supportive community. We have women's committees in the ironworkers that actually do Habitat for Humanity as a group effort, helping out, giving back to the community. Our women's committee in Local 86 in Seattle, actually, they adopt a family every Christmas, or many families, and give them Christmas presents so they have a Christmas. These are all things that not only elevate their union, but elevate their community as well. And we know women are great communicators. So you get a woman on a job, the communication is definitely going to be elevated. Women talk to whoever they're talking to, not at. And that's a big difference. And then you get those new perspectives and new ways of doing work. We know that physically, we're probably not as strong, and our upper body strength is not that of a man. But I can tell you that my lower body strength, my legs, I've got a lot of power in my legs, and most women do. We have babies, for God's sakes, many without drugs. We can do this. We are doing this. So you just get that new perspective and that new way of doing work, which is so important. Kathy touched on it earlier, that having different people, different perspectives, coming from different communities, coming from different backgrounds, just is going to make work better because we're going to have new ways of thinking about how work should get done. Next slide, please. So I said this already, people that leave the industry say that it wasn't because of the work was too difficult. And I just want to emphasize that again. They pointed to a hostile work environment and harassment and lack of advancement opportunities. And on average in the ironworkers to train one apprentice costs us about $60,000 for a 4-year program. The investment and the time and the money is significant. So we want to make sure that our training dollars are actually going towards retention, that we're not going to lose those apprentices because of how they're treated on a job. Next slide, please. And with that, I guess I'm passing this on to Jessica.
Thanks, Vicki. And thank you to all of our presenters. I just wanted to take a moment to chime in here. And I think Chris mentioned it at the beginning, and I've been putting a few things in the chat. But this is just the first in a series of at least 3. Potentially, we already have a 4th webinar getting lined up that are going to be happening throughout March. So on March 1st, we'll cover strategies to recruit and retain women in more detail. And on March 22nd, we'll get into how to improve treatment of women and be an ally on the job. So just make sure you go to cpwr.com to register for those. And now I will hand it over to Chris to get into the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. So we had a very good number of questions come in during the registration process, and we thank you for those folks who submitted the questions. There's been a few coming in through the chat, and if you have additional questions, please pop them in the chat or in the Q&A. And if we don't get to them, we're definitely collecting them and help us inform future webinars. But now is the Q&A section. So I'm going to kind of randomly go through some of the questions that have come in. And I thought I would start with Amber, some of the kind of data or trend questions. So if you're here, Amber, can you? All right, you are. So the first question I wanted to ask you is there any information we have on injury differences between women and men in construction?
So yes, so I haven't pulled the updated statistics, but our May data bulletin from last year looked at both fatal injury and non-fatal injury trends. And we actually did look at the rate of fatal and non-fatal injuries by sex. And what we found in 2020, that the rate was 10.8 fatal injuries per 100,000 full-time construction workers, male, whereas the female rate was 1.9. So we do see a drastically lower rate once we account for the population. And so that's for our fatal injuries. And then we see something similar for our non-fatal injuries. The male for non-fatal injuries rate per 10,000 full-time employees was 103, whereas the female was 27 per 10,000. So we do see drastically different rates once we account for population size split by sex. And so that is in our data bulletin and something we're currently working on updating with the latest injury statistics.
Great. There's another question that's somewhat related, but not. You talked about the percentage of females employed in construction and in all of construction as well as in the trades, the blue collar. Do we know any information about safety professionals in construction and the number of females that are in that? And I think that may be a question for you, but also Kathy, who's of that ilk.
I'd be very interested in seeing if Kathy has an estimate. So for most of our employee statistics, we're using census or BLS data. So CPS data is what I currently use today for the presentation. And within that, the number of construction safety professionals, the sample size is not actually stable enough to produce reliable estimates, which is a shame. I can look into pooling multiple years of data so we can take a look at that, but maybe Kathy knows the real magic behind the scenes.
I don't have specific numbers. Probably the best source, and maybe we can share this with the audience at a later time, would be to look at an association like the American Society of Safety Professionals. I know within that group, there are a lot of women and a lot of women that belong to the Women in Safety Excellence Common Interest Group. But I could not tell you, I can only tell you from a personal perspective, I don't see a lot of women on job sites other than me walking around. And for us, my company has actually gone to our trade workers and hired safety professionals from the trade workers. We've brought up actually a couple of women recently into a safety role, and I hate to say this about my own company, but those are the first women in probably 20 years that we've actually brought into that same position within the company, other than myself. So I'm one of those, I feel like I've been a unicorn for a long time.
Thanks, Kathy and Amber. Melissa, there's a question that was asked beforehand on NAB2 policies and strategies, and you talked about a few of them, identifying that Trades Futures has been set up, and Nicole Schwartz, as the executive director, will be on our next webinar to talk more about that. There was questions, are there any other specific strategies or to deal with labor shortages that you wanted to share?
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest things is we are really working diligently with our building trade councils across the country to work also with their city and county leadership, especially around just basically funding more apprenticeship readiness programs. That really is the best way. I saw a presentation where we looked at hydrogen hubs that will be breaking ground, small modular reactor, and also at the microchips, semiconductors, and forecasted at least around 105,000 jobs in like the next 10 years. So we're really going to have to make sure that that we have more funding, especially from our state and locals, like a lot of funding through some of the money from the Department of Transportation for infrastructure. You can include in those funds. You can include in it basically funds for training, so you can use it for apprenticeship readiness programs. So we need more folks to continue to fund apprenticeship readiness programs, and then we also want to be able to have a clear pipeline of work. So utilization of targeted hire on those programs or on those projects, project labor agreements. Those are going to be some ways to provide a guarantee of employment, because I think the key part of this is, yes, we have this significant need for more skilled labor, but skilled labor becomes skilled because of actual jobs and work. So we can't just think about the training part of the equation. We have to look at the other side of the equation that focuses on actual job placement. And then we want to make sure that people are in registered apprenticeship programs and that they're working with contractors that have the same goals around increasing representation of women and workers of color. So that's a whole lot I think I just said, but I feel like you can't neglect kind of the ecosystem of action that is going to be necessary for us to increase the number of skilled trades, women and men, and people in this country.
Thanks. And to me, this is connected to a question that just came in through the chat, and it's basically from someone talking about governors of a certain states that call DEI policies illegal. So I don't know if, how do you work in an environment that's hostile to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion? And that may be in a particular state, or it could be in a local union, right? Or it could be in a non-union housing home builder or something. I don't know if you had any kind of reaction to that type of attitude and how to deal with that.
Absolutely. So a part of my work I've been doing since I've been with NAB2 is a lot of outreach with mayors and city council across the country on, working in partnership with our local councils. And I will tell you that a lot of really good work is actually happening in red states, to be very clear. And so this is where the work of counties, of cities, is really important. A lot of really blue cities, or whatever terminology you want to utilize, but more progressive or cities, leadership with common sense. Maybe that's a better way of me saying it. Many of them might be in red states, but they're really utilizing all of the tools in their toolkit to be able to, do it. And I think targeted local hire, I think in a place where perhaps project labor agreements are illegal, I think is a good opportunity. And then also really digging deeper into procurement and that's, I think, another area where there's opportunity. So you may not be able to move very, very boldly or loudly with pro-union or project labor agreements, but there's other ways that you can kind of get some of this work done without calling it, unionization or what have you. And I know some of our councils are in jurisdictions where that's how they have to work and they are successful. I think this work is a challenge no matter where you are. I want to be really clear about that. Obviously there are some very shiny examples, but even those shiny examples did not get where they are very easily. It still took a lot of work. So I want people to feel encouraged and know that there are, it may be a little bit more difficult, but it still is, it all takes a lot of work and coordination.
Great, thank you, Melissa. I want to kind of throw this towards Vicki, but other folks may want to respond to it. And this is one of the toughest questions, I think. Well, they're all tough. Schedules are very inflexible in construction and hours can be unpredictable. How can the industry change to accommodate parents?
I've been thinking about this for a while, so I'm glad I was asked this question. There's no reason why we all have to start at 7 a.m. We could have staggered shifts starting. We need to start rethinking how we do construction. A 7 a.m. start is not great for working families. We know that because childcare centers don't open till 6. You can't make it to if you drop your kid off at 6, you can't make it to work by 7. But we're going to have to start rethinking how we're going to do construction, and especially with all the work that we have ahead of us. I don't think there's a one size fits all, and I think we're going to have to take a look at that. I love that the pilot in Wisconsin is looking at this as well, or looking at voucher systems to help people to be able to pay for childcare, because that's one of our biggest barriers. So in my opinion, rethinking construction, and Kathy, I'm sure you've got something to say about this because we've had many conversations about this.
Realistically, why couldn't we have a split shift or a, maybe some people can start at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and then have a 10 o'clock start and a 2 o'clock start and a 4 o'clock start, instead of everybody gets here at 7 in the morning and we disperse all the work. There has to be peaks and valleys in work activities throughout the course of a day. And, if it's truck unloading, why don't you stack the workload so that we can unload more trucks between the hours of 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon instead of bringing them in and starting to unload at 7 in the morning. It is a real challenge, and it does take a lot of effort to rethink how we organize our schedules. But we have been through some tough scheduling times with, I don't want to blame the pandemic, but in the last couple of years, we have found that there are many different ways to conduct business. And so the construction industry and project-specific activities need to consider that as well.
Great. And, along those lines, there's a question on, have we heard of employers or contracts done anything creative to entice women into the trades? Just throwing that out there for ideas.
I'm going to just say that I am the result of a project labor agreement. I would have never been an ironworker had there not been at McCormick Place in 1985 a way for me to get in, and knowing that they needed to ramp up and get women in. So I am a product of that. So I think that project labor agreements are amazing, and they gave me an opportunity, and they've taken me to be having, I've had a great middle class life. I have done very well being an ironworker. And I think that that's what we need to look at, is looking at more project labor agreements and that sort of thing.
So then on the other, I'm sorry, was there someone else?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, from a contractor perspective, having a women's initiative and really focus on hiring women, all women across our organizations. The folks at the executive level need to understand that we want women in our organizations. We don't want to conduct business the same way that we always have. We want persons of color. We want to be more inclusive in our retention efforts. We need to be sure that when women get onto project sites, that they're not placed into positions where their skills as a craft person are not recognized. We can't just say, "Oh, come on in, and now you can be a fire watch, or now you can be an aerialist spotter." And companies need to justify why they're laying off a woman. Why was a woman the last person to be hired and the first person to be laid off?
And just to jump on that, Kathy, having women in that core work crew that goes from job site to job site is huge. Having a core diverse work crew is going to keep it diverse as you start adding more people. And when you mentioned that just a second ago, we also don't want women checkerboarded going from job site to job site just to get those numbers for their PLAs. Bring them on, keep them there for the duration, hire more women at the other job site that you need. It's not fair to the woman because she's not going to be able to become part of that core work crew because she's just going to be constantly checkerboard across the job sites. So thank you, Kathy, for reminding me of that.
Yeah, that's obviously a challenge. There were some questions you mentioned about the innovations and the pilots that Trades Futures is doing with childcare, and there were some questions in the chat about that. We don't have a lot more information. Perhaps on their next webinar, Nicole can share more, but these are in stage, just to warn folks. We collectively haven't solved that yet, but it's being worked on. Another challenge that someone asked a question about is sexual harassment. Is this still happening on the job sites, and what's being done about it, and thinking about how do legitimate complaints get handled without somebody getting blackballed. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Oh, I've got plenty.
Go.
I've got plenty of thoughts on this. That's part of the reason why the Ironworkers came out with their Be That One Guy training program and curriculum. It's because women, maybe not so much sexual harassment, but there is that too, but more the harassment, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that happens on job sites. And many women do not report because they have the perception that they're going to be blackballed. And I'm not saying that it would necessarily happen. I guess it just depends on who your leadership is. But I feel like the Ironworkers have got great leadership at the top and at the local level, and that they're going to handle this in the proper manner. I know that since I started my job at the International, things have changed how we're handling things. And it's no longer if I call the local union and I go, "Hey, it's Vicki O'Leary," and they're like, "Oh shit." Now it's like, "Oh, how can I help? What can I do? What do we need to do?" And they're actually reaching out to me when there's situations so that we make sure that the woman or the man that's been part of the bullying and harassment and intimidation had been victimized by that I actually get to talk with them and walk with them through the process, which I think is really important. We've got to make sure that they can report without the feeling of they're going to be blackballed or they're not going to ever work again. And we also need that the good guys that are on the jobs, instead of being bystanders, they become upstanders and they become the witnesses to these things so that we can get it to stop. We know that probably 90 to 95% of the Ironworkers are really good men, but that 5 to 10% we're giving way too much power to. And we need the good guys to step up when they see something. We always talk about in safety, see something, say something. This is no different. So we really need to look at this differently. And that's, again, that cultural shift that we need to take place in construction is no longer, if you tell on somebody or you make a report that you're a rat. It's ridiculous. So thanks.
And that kind of leads into, to something else that even if you are not part of a union organization, there are still ways to change the climate and the culture of the company by, something that, I'm thinking of the Construction Safety Week message this year is strong voices, safe choices. And if you are able to speak up and say something as an ally, as an advocate for those individuals who are being harassed and bullied, you are using your voice as a powerful message. And it's so important for us to say we want every job to be safe and people to feel comfortable on every job, no matter where they're working. If we're making it better for women, we're making it better for all. And that includes those individuals who are LGBTQ, who have not come out, who are afraid to say something about their sexual orientation or their religion. And so, I think that when you bring that up, we could be very inclusive in our efforts to reduce the amount of harassment, bullying, sexual harassment that we see on the job.
And
Right,
I'd like to also say that, Kathy, we know that people can always come to you on your job sites if they're experiencing bullying, harassment, and intimidation, that you will take care of it. And I think that we need to get that message out that the safety people on jobs are also a great resource for them.
Great, thanks. We've talked kind of collectively about, and Melissa in particular, about having partners in this effort to expand diversity, equity, and inclusion in the construction industry. But some of the questions that have come in are, related to is there something? Well, just to preface it, they had shop classes when I was in high school. They don't have shop classes anymore. That's a major problem for attracting all people to the construction industry. But in the terms of high schools and in the terms of construction management training programs and engineering careers at the college level, what can some of the partners be doing to have better exposure to work in construction, and that it is just an incredible way to the middle class, as Vicki said before?
Well, one thing I think is that we need to start much earlier than high school. I participate in career days with a middle school, and those kids, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, they already have their curriculum established, and it's almost always go to college, get a degree. And so we need to work within our state educational systems to say there's more than just college. There are vocational programs at the community college level, and we need to make sure that our local school boards know about those programs. We need to educate parents to tell mom and dad that construction is a great field for your kid to get into, and we need to make certain that that if there's pushback, we need to say to our school boards, hey, can I have 10 minutes at your next meeting because I want to talk about construction.
Can I also add to that? So I second everything that was just stated. I think the other part of it too is there needs to be good models in place. So like here in Maryland, we have a lot of CTE students, and oftentimes they actually don't end up in a CTE career pathway, right? Some of them that maybe, worked in a carpentry program or a masonry program. And so we also have to do a better job of actually advocating, one, to make sure that you have contractors, that you have apprenticeship utilization standards, that they're leveraging. The best way to leverage, work is project labor agreement in some cases, especially big public projects. But there has to be a clear pipeline connection for that young person to walk into, right? And so the way that we look at other industries where you have programs, for tech, where they go work for a big tech company, I won't shout out any of them, but we know the different ones out there. We have to create the same pipeline. And also sometimes some parents they have never seen people, because depending on the market that they're in or the type of construction careers that someone like they had or people they know had, they haven't seen good models where they've been employed sustainably from project to project. So we also have to not only do the early reach and do the early touch and then also provide the exposure experiences, there has to be somewhere for them to go. And I think that's what we have to also remember, is that the industry's changed so much in the past 20, 30, 40 years, where you don't see not only the CTE pathways in high schools, but you also don't necessarily always see a good representation of job opportunities for young people. And you can't ignore that, because if you don't see the job, then what are you studying to be a carpenter or electrician if there's no jobs that you can actually look to having once you leave?
Great. Any other thoughts on that one? Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I'm at 3:02, so we've filled up our hour very easily. And to remind folks who are attending this webinar, we've got 2 more coming up, and the panels will be as exemplary as this panel. And I wanted to thank the panelists, particularly Amber, Kathy, Melissa, Vicki. You guys are superstars, and I really appreciate you joining us for this webinar series and helping us plan it. And Jessica, who's kind of the mastermind behind it all, not just the host, is capturing all the questions that we didn't get to that came in through registration and during this. And we're going to keep track of them and keep working on it and get things going. But with that, thank you all the attendees, and thank you the panelists for what a great bunch of information. I really appreciate it personally, and have a great afternoon.